So I've been thinking a lot lately about what it means to be a painter and an artist, uh, and not any artist, but specifically a painter, um, in today's world that we live in. What it means to try to exist not just in the creative world, because going to an art school, I found to be very much like a cocoon. There weren't a terrible amount of conversations about how to go about being an artist as a business person, right? And this is always the sort of troublesome conversation that parents have amongst themselves, family members you have with your significant other, or whomever. If you are somebody who's endeavoring to be an artist, specifically a painter, and as a part of that, as a component of that, or in tandem, I suppose would be the better way to think about it, is the conversations of intellectual high art, and in that realm, then with this sort of more traditional skill of hand art, and these very differing opinions and ideas of what art is, not just what art can be, because that's the conversations that you have with other artists, with dare I say true artists, because art can be those intellectual things that those very abstracted concepts and things that you see these wild installation pieces that maybe don't make any sense to you. Or just very 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 high concept, low technical ability, right? And then you have these the skill of hand and the sort of general person in the public who thinks that an artist has to be this very intensely skilled, dedicated, oriented person. And truth be told, I think there's something to be said. There's something to be said about both. Very much like a yin yang, as far as a balance, right? If you're all intellect, an idea, it's very hard to place a monetary value on that, and therefore it's very difficult to be able to sell work in that sense. And that's where people write grants, and there's a sort of that other aspect of a business of art and grant writing. And if you're not good at that, or you don't have any kind of specific training and knowledge and a background, if you will, and somebody helping you with that, that can be a very difficult part of the art world to break into. That being said, the most skilled technical artists who have little, if any, concept to what they're doing are always met with a phrase, something like, "Oh, that looks like a photograph," as if to say the human hand is always then striving for the ability of the lens, what the lens and the machine can do. A lot of this is alluded to in Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. You should be, at least, if you're not. So you have to have a balancing act between those. There has to be a yin and a yang, concept and technical ability. Or at least I've come to believe and think that an artist today, a painter today, any artist really, but me being a painter, that's where I'm going to always kind of revert to. A painter today really truly has to have that. You have to have something about what you're doing, right? And it can be something as simple as, I love warm weather, I love the ocean, I love the beach. I could literally just live on the beach. Um, Instead, I'm in Philadelphia. Well, but I digress. But in that sense, I find myself in this moment thinking a lot about, okay, well, maybe I'll sell prints online, and that's something that people, make money off of their Etsy pages, and they link social medias, and people all over the world can see what you're doing, and oh hey, that $10 print of that painting, that looks pretty cool, and I'll buy that, and that works fine for some people. I can't say that that's not an enticing thought to me, because when you're left on your own, if you're not a part of the gallery world, so to speak, in that kind of, in a cyclical sense, that goes back to what type of art are you making. If you're making this very intellectualized art and something that's not grounded in something that the general public would have an interest in, you run into that problem. If you're going to be able to get into a gallery space and then sell work, who's buying art these days? The truth of the matter is, there's a conversation to be said about how many people actually buy art, or do they go to a Target, or they buy some kind of cheap print or some kind of Ansel Adams thing that they saw at Michael's or something like that, where there's not only not an interest, there's just not an education in it, and it's very, or it can be at least, very daunting, very scary. Why would I do that? I don't know anything about that. All modern art looks like my kid could do it, or some kind of crazy thing that meaning the public at large, says. And you have to start to ask yourself and think, you look at Renaissance art, what art has always been about was something that could connect to the masses. That's why it was made. Granted, it's all religious, specifically Christian, Judeo type of ideologies and beliefs, but all art seems to have a fundamental rooting in religion in whatever area or locale of the world you're in, because it can connect to the masses. The biggest problem that I have, and maybe perhaps some people out there as well have, is this existence within two worlds, right? I was just saying this to my girlfriend in the car the other day. I've sought to make art that somehow can exist a little in this world and a little in that world, the yin and yang, right? Something that has an intellectual basis, something that is stimulating to the mind, and then something that is stimulating then to the heart, right? Because if you're all heart and no mind, you're brainless, you're dumb. But if you're all intellect, you have no heart, there's no feel, there's no emotion. And that kind of gets to the point of, why make art? Why? What's the point of being an artist, other than it inherently feels like it's worth your time? If you had weeks, days, hours left to live, you wouldn't. Very few people would. I think it would be hard pressed to say more than a lot would opt to, let's go to work. Can't wait to go to work and sit at my desk and shift papers around and move numbers and whatever people do in their offices. Play computer games. At a job I had before, I walked in on somebody playing a game of solitaire. This executive. I thought it was one of the funniest things I'd ever seen. Their face was like a deer in headlights. But it gets to the point of, Why would you do it? Its functional purpose is itself. If it's a freestanding sculpture, or if it's painting on a wall, if it's an installation, I mean, it doesn't necessarily do anything. It doesn't have a product like a camera, has an action and, takes an image or video of something, and then you have that for posterity. That's art's sort of functional purpose as far as a direct functional thing. A chair you can sit in, right? Go build a chair you can sit down in. But its intellectual purpose can be both intellectual just inherently in itself and stimulate conversational ideas, perhaps radical, or they can also be perhaps something more transcendental, and that's something that I feel like has very slowly been eroded away from the concept of making art. Think of the Hudson River School, right? And that seems so banal and passé to people in the art world today, but you go on and you on Instagram, and you'd be hard pressed to not find some image of some person in some amazing locale in the world, and it's literally just a recording of this is the world. If you're sitting in some American city, some Western city, and it's that hustle bustle, get quickly to work so you're not late to work, work your life, work your hands to the bone, and rush hour right back home, and you're sitting there in traffic thinking like, oh man, God, I wish I was living in the tropics. Hey, let me go onto my Instagram, and I'm going to look at my Instagram and see that some person somewhere is doing that. Why aren't I doing that? It's the inherent similarity between, Frederick Church painting of this, grand sort of vista of nature in America. Although there's some historical differences, and we won't get into that, but it's the same idea of the beauty of the world, of the natural world. There's different points throughout art history in the recent 100, 150 years where you can see that that's been eroded from. That's an art history conversation for another time, but the point of today is that because it's sort of just completely mitigated as banal or passé, I think is where to start to examine your own thoughts, as I am mine. Hence these just video diaries about art, and my thoughts. I think that's where to go and start. Why is it that when you walk into a New York or a Chicago gallery and you see these Mark Rothko type abstractions, that's all that you can see? You're the days of seeing these very meticulously worked landscapes where its purpose is literally just about promoting the beauty and the power of nature, transcendentalism perhaps, if you will. It's not even a thought. But then when you walk into galleries, I was walking into a gallery in Charleston, South Carolina, and there were these fantastic plein airs, and I was having a conversation with another artist some years back here in Philly about this plein air craze that's been happening, and people kind of working in this very sort of painterly style that's kind of like a little bit abstracted, but very much still rooted in something real and tangible. And it dawned on me in this Charleston gallery, thinking just somehow that was rattling around somewhere, and it dawned on me, looking at some of these not necessarily meticulously worked landscapes. You could tell that perhaps they started out as a plein air, or they were worked from a plein air painting as a reference. That this is a conversation that's happening. Perhaps it's even happening in our schools. It wasn't for me when I was an undergrad some years ago, or even in graduate courses or with just other artists that I've come across. But if you're sitting in your apartment or your home or your studio or wherever you may be at, and you're on your own and you're wondering perhaps why is it that these feelings, these sort of innate feelings about painting the world that you see in a way that you see it are not going to get you anywhere. You know, the old adage that you know, an artist, a painter, is somehow ahead of the curve, and their work is not given its sort of its credit, its justification or just due in their time frame, in their lifetime, and that when they're dead, you know, they'll be appreciated. You can't worry about that. I mean, you can, but worrying doesn't do anything for you. But keep going, because I could be wrong, but I do feel like there's something else. There's something happening in the world right now. You have to have equal parts intellect and equal parts feel. You know, the people that root out transcendental kind of conversations and just completely dismiss that as sort of banal or somehow not deserving of a more high art conversation or gallery representation, if you will, are just as wrong as the people that go out and just sort of paint these scenes of nature and don't kind of push themselves in an intellectual way to say, well, you're painting nature and it's beautiful, and if that's all you're doing and that's all you seek to do, that's totally fine, but perhaps there's something more. Yeah. Perhaps there's something more.